Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Bryce, and I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in El Paso. Well, it's Monsoon Awareness Week again. It seems like we were here just a few months ago, but actually it was last year when we had our Monsoon Awareness Week hangouts, and here we are again. We are here for this week. We're going to be talking all week long at the same time slot. So watch your favorite Weather Service social media channels. They'll be posting the links to the YouTube and the Twitter so that you can, we'll be posting the links to YouTube on Twitter and Facebook so that you can join in and watch along. If you have a question, feel free to tweet us a question and tag it with the hashtag Monsoon2006. And so we are just getting ready here. I see Emily has joined us from the Tucson office, but real quickly, let me run down the line here and introduce everybody who is on the video hangout today, and we'll dive right in and we'll talk about what Monsoon Awareness Week is and today's specific threat. But first, joining me from the Phoenix office is Paul. Paul, say your last name for me because I never say it right.
Inyageth.
Yeah, Paul.
Right. Paul.
So very good. And Paul joins us from he's the WCM over in Phoenix, right?
Sue, Science Operations Officer.
I apologize. You are the Sioux there in Phoenix. Very good. And on down the line here, we got Kerry Jones. He is the WCM, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist in Albuquerque. And then also in Albuquerque is Chief Meteorologist Jorge Torres at KOB-TV, right there in beautiful Albuquerque. Is the station located in Albuquerque, Jorge?
Yes, it's located in the southwest part of the city, right next to the zoo, so we can hear the lions every now and then. Did we lose Tim?
Tim's frozen in space.
Oh, no.
Well, who's next on the list? How about Carrie? Did you introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I see. I see Alex. Alex, are you on? Alex.
I'm on. I can see you all. Alex Tardy, National Weather Service, San Diego.
And I believe Emily.
Yep. Hi, Emily French. I'm a forecaster in Tucson.
So yeah, Paul, or I mean, we can until Tim maybe becomes unfrozen there. I don't. Let me see.
Tim, you need some new bandwidth. You freeze up a lot. There he goes. Maybe.
I'll be back.
There he is.
Hey, I'm back. Hey, sorry about that, everybody. It's a computer glitch. Where did anybody pick up, or?
Yeah, we went through the rest of the line.
Very good. Well, I apologize about that, everyone. You gotta love technology, you know? That's what I always say. So, sorry about that computer glitch. So it is Monsoon Week 2016, and we use this week to highlight the monsoon season and some of the specific threats that are seen during the monsoon season. And so this week we're starting out with Monday.
We lost him again.
Oh boy.
He's doing it from home, isn't he?
It looks like it. Yeah, Alex. I don't know what his setup is.
I'm sure by Thursday we'll be humming along just fine.
I know we had a few snafus last year, but overall I think the connections were pretty good.
I don't know. Can Tim hand control off to someone else? I don't know if he can.
Yeah, I
Like,
don't know, Alex. It looks. We'll see. Well, let's ask him when he jumps on here if it happens again.
Am I back?
You are.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll stick around this time. I've closed all my windows, and if not, I'll reboot my computer. But that's just the challenges here. So where are we here in our discussion?
Still at the beginning.
Okay, very good. So Monsoon Awareness Week is basically what we are doing when we are talking about the different safety issues and different threats that are possible during Monsoon Awareness Week. So today's Monday, and of course we'll be talking about flash flooding here in a few minutes. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll be talking lightning safety. Wednesday is downburst winds. Thursday is dust storm. And Friday, I think it'll be well timed, at least for New Mexico. We're going to be talking heat, where it is going to be very hot by the end of the week. So, Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about flash flooding and how it affects people, and what are some of the things that they can do to stay safe?
Well, of course, as we get into our monsoon season, Tim, we talk about thunderstorms, high intensity, short duration rainfall. And I was just thinking as I was leaving the office today that we often will get thunderstorms that will produce an inch of rain in 30 minutes or even less. And so when you have such a great volume of rainfall and water that falls, in our case, in our landscape with mountains and so forth, that water will rush and fill up arroyos that are normally dry, and often will catch people off guard because, as we all know, the rain can fall miles away from where the flood impacts might occur. So we have a whole host, I think, of issues across the Southwest, specifically related to flash floods, and it's something that we take very seriously. And I know Jorge with KOB does a great job in terms of getting the message out, but also photographs, right, and video, because when people see those impacts, they tend to take action.
You are right, Carrie. Obviously, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the flooding up in near Espanola. I mean, not during the monsoon, but still, you saw the images of cars being swept away around the arroyos. And you know, when people see that, they really gets across. But unfortunately, we still see people thinking that, oh, that's just them. I'll be okay. And you know what we've seen in Texas over the past few weeks and months with the flooding there, it just seems like people think that they can beat Mother Nature, and they can't.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as little as 6 inches of water, flowing water, will certainly take most adults downstream. And we say, you know, around a foot or even a little bit less of fast-moving water will sweep most vehicles off the road. So you're right; it's an underestimated, certainly, aspect of our dangers during the monsoon.
For sure. Now, if I remember right, I believe flash flooding is not the #1 killer, but it is the #2 killer of people in the United States each year. Behind heat, believe it or not. That's the #1 killer. I think it's about 70 people a year are killed in flash flooding. So, and we just saw, like Jorge was saying, we just saw over in East Texas some horrible flooding related to all the rains that they had seen over there. And it's a little different over there. They get 10, 11, a dozen inches of rain, whereas in the Southwest, it doesn't take that kind of amount of rain to get us flash flooding. With the different topography that we have and just the different soil types and the desert, and we go so long between rain that it gets all hard packed. It is like raining on top of concrete, and it does not take. It's more of an intensity thing. You can get half an inch of rain in 20 minutes, and you're going to get a lot of water headed down some of these arroyos.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul, can you talk a little bit about flash flooding as related to like burn scar or you know, places that have seen a fire in recent times?
Yeah, anytime that we have these wildfires that occur across the West, I mean, it just burns up all the vegetation, obviously, and it turns, especially places that aren't already concrete and glass-like, it turns it into that. So, it's going to take usually take at least 2 to 3 years for some of that vegetation to start coming back and slow down some of that water when it falls. But the amount of rain it takes for the flash flooding to occur and those burn scars is drastically reduced. Even like a half inch in a half hour can cause some pretty significant problem. It's definitely something we have to be aware of. I know a lot of offices in the National Weather Service, when they have wildfires and eventual burn scars, they'll take those shape files that outline the perimeter of where the fire was, and we use that in our system so that we can monitor those areas much more closely for the flash flooding, and we really lower our thresholds, in our minds and also in our numerical guidance, and how much rain does it take for there to be significant problems.
Hey, Emily, are you guys in Tucson? Do you have any active burn scars that you're having to keep a close eye on right now?
From what I can remember now, I've only been here 3 years, but there was one town to the south, maybe right around the time I got here, and so I believe it's in the Mule Mountains. So yeah, when we have heavy rain over that area, although we are now 2 to 3 years removed from that event, we do keep an eye on it. We haven't had as much or as many issues in that area recently, but we certainly do watch our rainfall rates, from our alert gauges and whatnot in that area, and make calls to spotters about the washes there, because we do get flash flooding quite frequently in that terrain, especially.
I know for El Paso, we haven't had a major wildfire in about 3 years. Maybe it's coming up on the 4th season since we had the Silver Fire, which was over near Hillsboro, New Mexico. And it burned over 100,000 acres. And like you guys have said, that first season, just a month after that, it took hardly any rain at all to bring a bunch of water down off the mountain into this town of Hillsboro and some of the other small towns, actually little towns on either side of the Black Mountain Range. And then the next year it got a little better, and the next year it got a little better. So like you guys have experienced, this year it looks like we'll just have to kind of keep a little bit of an eye on that, but hopefully the work that they did to remediate the ground and breaking up the soil, the Mother Nature, the way she's gotten stuff growing, and we got the small trees and grasses, that'll help really reduce that chance of flash flooding on those burn scars. But Alex, I know that last summer, or was it the summer before, you guys had some really interesting flash flooding around the San Bernardino area.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. We had flooding on our really steep slopes. These are mountains that are 10,000 feet high. The problem we have is hikers will go up in those areas during a typical July, August, September day and not really be aware of how much it's raining far away from them. So the past 2 years, actually, we've lost hikers. They've been killed in flash flood events that have come raging down the creeks off the San Bernardino Mountains. And those are in areas where there weren't even burn scars. We do have an area where there's a large burn scar from the lake fire, and that area is going to be a concern this summer because of the little bit of rainfall that it takes. But in these storms, we saw 3 or 4 inches of rain that came raging down these creeks and literally caught people off guard. There was a really sad story last year. A couple was crossing a creek that normally is just kind of trickling, and one of them crossed it, had some trouble, started falling. The other one, I believe it was the wife, tried to help her husband, but he slipped out of reach and ended up going downstream, and she couldn't see him. He succumbed to the water, and he drowned.
What can people do, especially like hikers? Because when you're going out to hike, that's not the first thing you think of is I need to be thinking about flash flooding. What should people do? And anyone can just chime in here. What should people do if they're going to be out in the mountains or the higher terrain and there's a chance for thunderstorms somewhere around them? What's the best thing for them to do?
Well, I would say avoid the normally dry areas, Tim, like the arroyos. I know here in the Albuquerque area we have the Sandia Mountains that are right close by. And I know a lot of folks, well, you want to plan your activities. Obviously, if we have thunderstorms in the forecast, you want to plan accordingly. But what we run into, I think, are folks that are maybe in areas where the rain is not falling, right? So it's, miles away. And all of a sudden they realize that water is moving down. these normally dry channels and stream beds and arroyos, and they're caught off guard when in fact, just recognizing the fact that rain can fall well away from where the flood occurs. It seems like we run into that issue just about every season. So that's one thing I would say for sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just a matter of being aware of your surroundings. That if you're in a creek or a normally dry, down an arroyo, and you can see that there's rain up above you, just wisdom says you may not want to be hiking in that area and get to a higher ground. Of course, the best thing to do is when you see that water coming, and most of the time you can actually probably hear it coming. I've seen some of the videos, how they have storm chasers in the Midwest. Well, I've seen they have these flood chasers in the Southwest, and they will figure out where the rain is falling, and they'll figure out what arroyo that water is moving through, and then they get ahead of it, and it's some impressive video of that water as it's flowing along. And I don't think people, some people think that water comes down like it's going at 100 miles an hour, and it doesn't. But at the same time, it's not moving along at a crawl either. This guy was running along next to it to keep up with the flood crest. He was on the bank, and he was running along with it with his camera. But there was so much debris and wood and just junk on the front edge of that. It was very impressive how it just kind of just moved as this big amorphous mass down the side of the mountain, and just kind of filled in everywhere, and before you knew it, it went from perfectly dry to several feet of very fast-moving water in just a matter of minutes. So, like you said, I think it's just important that people be aware of the forecast, and then be aware of what's happening and where they are geographically. If you're hiking and you can see that the water has cut here, be aware that there's a reason for that, and that's the way Mother Nature moves water off that higher terrain. Just as a side note, does anybody, I know for El Paso, and I'm pretty sure the same for Albuquerque, monsoon season officially starts June 15th, but as far as I know, the monsoon flow does not look like it gets established in the next week or so. It does. Tucson, San Diego, Phoenix, did you guys see, in the forecast, do you have any kind of monsoon moisture starting to move in?
I think looking just when I came on shift today, looks like we're starting to get some easterly flow set up maybe next Tuesday, Wednesday-ish time frame. It didn't look all too strong, but there's definitely hints of, the high pressure moving right into the area where it needs to be, and, some moisture trying to push up into this area. But, of course, not after we have the really big warm-up this weekend. And we were just talking a few minutes ago about how we often have that, really big warm up into the, upper, 105 to 110 or higher, and then shortly thereafter is when we start pulling that moisture northward. So we'll be keeping an eye on things toward the middle of next week, I think.
And that's true. One of the keys for the North American monsoon is to develop that heat low over the Arizona region, or just right around there, to, like you said, to kind of, and what happens with the heat low is, if I remember right, is that it just gets so warm that the air gets so buoyant that it just kind of lifts, and by itself, that buoyant air, as it lifts, you got to fill in the air around the sides, and it starts to pull in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, from the Pacific, even from northern Mexico that's got a lot of moisture in it. And as that heat low develops, it starts to swing the winds around, and that's the key to the monsoon season, is that seasonal shift in the winds, and that's what starts to pull that moisture in. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. That's what we hope to see. It's not what we saw last year. With the El Nino, we really expected things to be a little bit wetter than they were, and especially into the winter, but it just didn't happen. But the big thing we noticed last summer is we never really got into that prolonged period of easterly flow here. So I think at least seeing hints of it now is a good sign, and I'm hoping that it hangs around a little bit longer for this summer.
I always have people try to guess. They try to tell me, they ask me, is it going to be a wet season? Hey, it's been real dry in the spring. Does that mean it's going to be real wet during the monsoon season? And I just tell them, and this is one of those myths. There's no correlation. But are there signals like We all talked about El Nino last year. We've clearly exited out of El Nino, which is that abnormal warming down off the coast of Peru along the equator. That has gone away, and we're kind of in between. Everyone expects us to go into La Nina. But as we transition, what are some of the signals or what are some of the effects that kind of a neutral or even a La Nina have on the region? Paul, what is your feeling that will El Nino / La Nina or that neutral state have any effect on our monsoon season, or is it just not a game player right now?
I don't know. I don't think it's going to be much of a game player. Looking at some of the official outlook stuff from official outlooks from TPC, they're not really showing much of anything for us either way. We're kind of in the transitory period where we've just come out of the really strong El Nino. We're just switching into La Nina. Historically, we tend to expect the El Nino to bring a lot of rain and snow to the southwest, which would have meant it would have taken longer to warm up, and so some studies show that tends to put off the start of the thunderstorms in the southwest, but that really wasn't the case this last winter since it was pretty dry still down this way. So we'll see if that plays out. But a lot of times too, it just the way it's thunderstorms, and a lot of the interaction is on our mesoscale, so it's small factors and small things can mean big outcomes for the metro areas. I'm not exactly sure how it plays out in some of the other western cities, but I think Phoenix, I know for Tucson to an extent also. I mean, Phoenix is such a big city where it's about 70 miles from east to west and 40, 50 miles from north to south. It's nearly, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's really rare that the entire city sees thunderstorm activity on a single given day. It's just too big. And so a lot of times it's the hit and miss stuff, and then how do the outflow boundaries interact, and does that cause more thunderstorm development? And some areas are going to get hit really hard some days, and maybe a couple days through the summer, and other areas get very little rainfall. I mean, that's just very typical from one summer to the next. So it's just a lot of it just ends up being where your luck of the draw and where you're at overall.
Or sometimes the unluck of the draw.
Right.
And you bring up a very good point, Paul, that there's no typical monsoon season. From day to day, I'm always interested. Once you get into the heart of the monsoon season, it's very interesting to see. I've been on shift where one day the storms will be drifting to the west. The next day the storms will be drifting to the east. The next day they'll be drifting to the south. The next day they'll be drifting to the north. There's in the monsoon season, a lot of times it's very difficult to forecast exactly where that rain is going to fall. And like you said, Paul, sometimes it's the luck of the draw. Who's going to get it? It may be for El Paso, one side of town, the west side of town may get it, and the east side of town stays bone dry where the airport is. And then the next day it's flipped around, or we'll go a couple days without it. Hey, Jorge, for Albuquerque, what are the challenges up there as far as the monsoon from day to day? Because Albuquerque is a good size. Plus, you've got the Sandias right next to you.
Yeah, you got the Sandias, and then also you have the West Mesa, which does have an impact in some regards, especially with some of those outflow boundaries. One thing I've noticed since I've been working here, and Carrie, you may have noticed this too, is that when you get those outflows that come from the north, come from right around Santa Fe, it tends to interact better in Albuquerque for storms. But when you get storms from the south, I just noticed they kind of peter out once they move here, and perhaps to Harris Canyon, which is a canyon just to the east of Albuquerque. When you get easterly winds, it kind of just dries everything out. So we have these little microclimates that really impact us, especially in the winter, but also during the monsoon. But that's one thing I've noticed here is just it tends to see northern storms that move in that kind of are more beneficial for the city as far as rain, whereas that southerly flow, which you would think would help us out, I've really noticed that it doesn't bring anything. Like this past weekend, we had the southerly flow in the metro and didn't get anything here. It was all to the east, right, Gary?
Oh, yeah, big skunk for even, well, I'm east of Albuquerque, I even had zero. So, Tim, I wanted to say one thing real quick, if I could. Storm motion. Steering flow is a big factor during the heart of our monsoon season, and we had some big storms today, and Jorge was tracking them as well in the northeast part of the state, severe storms. But when we get into the monsoon season, those storm motions are much, much less. So we're talking about the heavy rainfall, but they just tend to set right over one spot, and that's always, we talk about outflow boundary interactions. I think Paul's exactly right. It's that mesoscale effects that go on just across the entire region. But those slow storm motions are always something that we look for.
For sure, and again, it can be you can be in the wrong spot and you get that 1 to 2 inches of rain in 20, 30 minutes, and if it's just over your area or just right above you in some kind of higher terrain, all that water gets funneled down. I did want to remind everybody, if you did have a question for all of our viewers, you can tweet them at hashtag Monsoon 2016, and we'll try to answer them. Hey, I guess I'll direct this either at Emily or Paul. What is the difference that you guys have seen as far as flash flooding in a rural environment versus an urban environment? I know that, especially like Phoenix, you've got the big city, but then you've got a bunch of rural area as well. How does that affect, like, the forecasters? How do they handle that, and how should people be aware of that?
I would say how we handle it's always going to be a challenge, and it's fundamentally different, the flash flooding in the city versus the rural areas. I mean, we even have philosophical discussions, I would say, about what constitutes flash flooding. I know the Flagstaff office even has put a team together and has looked at it over the last year or two to try to figure out what that definition is, because it varies between the forecasters and the Weather Service offices, and also what our customers perceive as flash flooding. If we're right in the city, it's for the most part the city is flat. There are some channels and some washes out there, but can you have flash flooding in a flat urban area? Does 6 inches of non-moving water because of storm drain backup constitute a flash flood? I can't really give an answer on that, but when you start getting out into the more rural areas and the topography starts to become more of an issue, or the extended urban areas, I would say, where we start to get into like foothills and things like that, then you do have places for the water to run and can definitely cross the roadways, and that's where we get those problems. The challenge is always observation. We have our tools to see where it's raining and how hard, but once the water hits the ground, our observations become much more limited. We try to help ourselves and help our customers by knowing ahead of time where those typical locations are that flood. We are aware of the kind of trouble spots where you have more rural highways running and they're not bridged. So you have the dips out there, they're crossing the arroyos. 363 days a year, they're probably just fine, but a day or two every year, there are going to be some problems. So, they each present our challenges, and luckily, most of our folks here have a lot of experience with working numerous monsoon seasons, and they're well aware of these different areas and how much rain it takes to get them going. And our relationships with our customers, they can get that information from out in the field and bring it back to us, so we're aware of what's going on and can share it with everyone else again.
Hey, Paul, can you, I'm going to have Emily kind of address the urban versus rural, but while she's talking, can you pull up a schematic of the rain gauge network that you guys have there in Maricopa County? I've always been impressed with the number of rain gauges that you have packed into the Phoenix metro area. But Emily, talk to me about, or talk to everyone about how urban versus rural can be, the different rainfalls that it can take, or different issues related to that as far as flash flooding goes.
Yeah, so in Tucson, we're similar to Phoenix, but I would have to say that I think, at least in our urban areas, we have more, and I'm not very familiar with Phoenix's area, but we do have several spots within the city that we have had flash flood deaths. So, and we know that when we hear them from spotters, or we see something on the news about this wash and that wash, that people have died there, and those are kind of trouble spots. So we're always keeping an eye on those locations, especially even when the rainfall might not be as much. And I think that Tucson is, our major hub, and then we've got, Douglas and Nogales. And down in Nogales, we have a lot of problems as well. It might be a little bit less urban, but we're also worried there about the water actually coming over from Mexico,
Right.
because the Nogales wash flows south to north. So a lot of times that flash flooding can sneak up on us. We're beam blocked there, and we really, especially in rural areas, I have to say we rely on our spotters very heavily. I think the other problem we sometimes have in rural areas is that people have lived there a long time, and they have this notion that, the wash is flooded so many times before, and they've driven through it so many times, and, it only takes that one time for someone to misjudge how deep the water is, how fast it's running. You don't know if the road's there, if there's sand there that you're going to get stuck in. And I think that is definitely one of the challenges, in our rural areas, is people underestimating, or they think that, oh, I've lived here for so long, I've done it 1,000 times. What's 1,001? And that's when they get caught.
Definitely. Now, you guys work with the Mexican authorities down there in Nogales, right, to help you get a kind of an idea when the water's on its way?
I want to say maybe last year we were in touch with Mexico, but the USGS does have a relationship with Mexico, and so they do have a few alert gauges on the other side of the border, and so we definitely monitor those very closely, just to see, if they've had a lot of rain and what that could potentially do when it gets on the, comes over to the other side. We've seen some devastating flooding in Nogales, Sonora, and then, I think it was maybe 2 years ago they actually had to close the port of entry due to flash flooding. So, it just depends, and again, the beam blockage there makes it really tough, but thankfully we have some really good spotters that will call us, and let us know when, the water's starting to come up, so that, we can alert the proper authorities to get people out of there.
And now, when you're talking about beam blockage, I want to be clear for the people out there. You're talking about the radar, and the radar, that's just basically where the radar can't see, or it's blocked by a mountain or something, and so you can't get the information you need off of the radar there.
Yes, yep. Amazingly, there are two other, kind of city centers other than Tucson, or two of, the 3 or 4, Nogales and then Douglas, which are both close to the international border. We really have limited radar coverage in both of those areas. I'd say in all, our CWA is probably about a third beam blocked. So we struggle in not having access, although I have been told that they are working to get access for us to the Mexican radar so that we can use that through MRMS.
Oh.
So that's really nice. I know up north they're doing that along the Canadian border. So the MRMS is working along the Canadian border. So I've been told, and I don't know what the timeline is, that they're trying to get us, working with Mexico. So that would really help.
Of course, the MRMS stands for Multi-Radar, Multi-Sensor, which is a new program the Weather Service has been working to develop, so that you don't rely just on one radar, or one sensor. They have a program where they actually combine those together, and it kind of gives you a mosaic of what's going on.
Yes. Yeah. So we're really excited about that if it comes to fruition.
Very good. I hope it does, because we're the same way. We have good coverage for part of our sweep through northern Mexico, but it would be great to have a little further south to know what's headed up in our way. Hey, Paul, were you able to find that map of your rain gauges?
Yeah, let me share part of my screen here. Oh, good. It's just coming. I don't know. So here, I was trying to retrieve for last monsoon, but it's just giving me the last 7 days here. So this is the flood control district for Maricopa County, and it operates a network here of approximately 320 rainfall gauges. So everywhere these little plus signs are, there's a rain gauge there. So it's quite an extensive network. This started back in 1982, I want to say, or so, and they've been adding ever since. So they have all the rainfall gauges, and you see it extends beyond Maricopa County too, because there's obviously rain up at the mountains, and that flows down into the city. There's also, let me show this here quick too. Another thing we do is, I set this up a number of years ago, where we take the rainfall data from the flood control district and all these gauges and kind of do an averaging of all of them, because we have, of course, our official gauge, which is at the airport near the center of the city, but because of the high degree of variability, there can be times where some part of the city gets plastered with rain and it doesn't rain at the airport at all, or vice versa. So at least some way to try to get a handle on what was the average rainfall across the city. We have this tool that runs on a daily basis and does that for us, and we've constructed that index back to 1998. The flood control district also has flow gauges on a whole bunch of the streams and arroyos and washes that are out there. I think this number is on the order of about 140 or 50. So there's a lot of data there that we can be looking at as well, and that tells us what's going on. And I know we were just talking about kind of this technology we're looking at too. I can share a little bit of this. Let's see if that plays on the right screen. Nope. Let's see. Nope.
It's on your desktop, so if you oh, there you go.
I want to animate. We'll see how it goes. So Emily was just talking about the multi-radar, multi-sensor. So this is a new data set that the Weather Service is generating. It came from partnership with the University of Oklahoma. Takes all the radars across the country and puts them together in one big mesh. It does it in a fairly smart way, and it's good for us because it allows us to interact with it a bit more and get some useful information out of there. So that's been really helpful. I think it'll be really good this summer. Something it feeds into that we can use is another data set here called FLASH. So that's Flooded Locations and Simulated Hydrographs Project. This is another University of Oklahoma tool. What it does is takes that radar data, and based on the radar data, tries to figure out how much rain fell and where did it fall. And then we can do two different things with that. One is they take it and run it through a hydrologic model, and that allows us to figure out, okay, how much rain fell and where is it going to go. And then another tool they have is showing how much rain fell and how unusual is that. So I have a couple examples. Here is from last year. We had a flood up in Wickenburg, and this is the return interval. So this is telling us how unusual of an event was this. Was this a 50-year rainfall event, a 100-year rainfall event, so a 1% return interval, or has a 1% chance of happening each year? Mm-hmm. Subjectively, I've been noticing that when we get to these 100-year rainfall events, that's really where we start to have problems. This was no exception here. We actually pegged out at the 200-year return interval, and you can see we had water flowing into houses that were in the extended part of the river basin. Here is from when Interstate 10 washed out last July. This is, I think, the day before, actually, that Wickenburg one. And here we had a pretty good area of 100 or longer return intervals, and that caused the bridge to wash out there. It was back in 2014 where we had a big area just to the north of the city that was 100-year or higher return interval, and that caused the Cape Creek, I believe it was, to overflow its banks, and we had water running down Interstate 17. So that was a new river channel that was formed. And back in 2014, in September, this was Phoenix's wettest day ever. We had 3.3 inches of rain at the airport itself. And you can see just right over the urban area, we had 25 to 100-year return interval, and that caused lots of flooding. I mean, just standing water mostly, but just lots and lots of water everywhere. So these tools are going to be, I think, really helpful for us to identify where are we getting too much water, and is going to really help us out with our flash flood warnings in this summer and subsequent years.
Hey, Paul, let me ask you, is like the alert gauge information, is that available to the public to view?
Yes, absolutely. If they just Google flood control Maricopa, it should come up. So there's their website there. I think just fcd.maricopa.gov will take you to that website. We'll take you to their website, and you can get it from there. So we look at it online in real time in our operational use.
Okay, and then for the MRMS information, is that also available for the public if somebody wanted to look at some of that? Maybe not the way we would use it on our
Right. Uh, to an extent, it is. Um, to an extent it is, but not necessarily a great way to use. The flash data is available online. That's flash.ou.edu.
And that is real-time information, or as real-time as we can make it, right?
Right. There's a little bit of the MRMS data actually runs pretty good, and it's kind of surprising how well it runs. Because you got to remember, it's taking radar data from 150 radars across the country, putting it all in one computer, and processing that into one big data set, and then pushing it back out. And it's doing that every 2 minutes, so there's not really a big latency there. With the flash data, they are then taking that MRMS data and running it through their hydro model, and so there's going to be a latency of about 10 to 15 minutes on that, but they're doing a lot of processing with it. But I mean, it's much better information than we had even in the last 2 years ago.
You know, I don't want to get too geeky, but as far as that, that flash data could be kind of a change of how the forecasters in the weather office kind of look at flash flooding information. And maybe some Carrie or Jorge or Emily could chime in, because instead of looking for 2 inches of rain in an hour, you're looking for a 1% return event or a 100-year return event, and that's your cue for issuing a flash flood warning or something like that. So very interesting where this could go from here. As far as it could be like a paradigm shift, and I hesitate to use that word. I don't like to use that word, but it could be a change for us how we actually interact with our hydrologic information.
I think it really is, honestly. I mean, if you look at a lot of our other data sets we have also, it's about contextualizing the information. An inch of rain in an hour in South Texas is going to be totally different than an inch of rain in Phoenix and an inch of rain in upstate New York. What these data sets allow us to do is to take that 1 inch of rain and put it in context for that location, for that time of year, for that climatology, for that topography, and it tells us, is this a big deal or not? And we're doing that with more and more weather information. I mean, it's the very same thing you might think about in the wintertime. I'm from Minnesota. An inch of snow during the wintertime, no one cares. An inch of snow in Atlanta at rush hour causes that horrendous problems. It's all about contextualizing the information, and when things get out of whack for some area, that's going to cause problems, and we're more and more getting the information to us, the meteorologists, that help us identify when that happens, and we can turn around and communicate that out to our customers.
What do you think of that, Carrie or Emily, as far as warning operations?
I think that we're going to start, looking at it this year. We, at least here, we've only just recently, been tasked with looking into the flash data, but I think it's a really important thing that we start, realizing that working with our partners and other agencies to find out what the impacts are and at what time, at what thresholds, I guess I should say, is more important than, as Paul said, an inch of rain in an hour. The impacts part is where, we're headed, and I think that's what's going to help us save lives, in the future.
Very true. Hey, I'm going to switch gears up a little bit because I want a little inside baseball from Jorge. What's it like there at the TV station when the rain really starts to come down? What kind of mode do you go into, and how do you communicate that out to the public about safety, about the amount of rain that's falling?
Well, in those type of events, what I like to do is obviously show rainfall rates, show how much rain has fallen in a certain location, and also show photos. For me and for other broadcast meteorologists, to be able to see what is happening clearly presents the message to the viewer. Talking about numbers, showing radar, I mean, you can try to present it in a way that viewers would connect with, but when they see a photo of a car that is floating away, or they see people jumping into the arroyo because someone is being washed away, that is the key thing. So whenever there is something coming in, I try to not only get photos and videos, but I talk to our newsroom, I talk to our producers and our desk about where we should send people. Because we have an idea already here in Albuquerque, the arroyo system is not really that complicated, so you know which areas we would go to get the best footage, and where we would go, and seeing people, we would know exactly where they'd be going into, and it would help the viewers understand, like, okay, this is serious. So for me, photos and videos and live pictures is the key when it comes to not just flash flooding, but any type of weather event.
Again, I think it's just like Paul said, putting it in context. You can say it rained an inch in an hour or 30 minutes, but to actually see the water rushing down some of these concrete arroyos or through a low water crossing can really help people put it in context, whether it hasn't done this in 100 years, or they can just see, I drive by that every day, and now there's a foot of water going across there. I think that, like you said, that really helps people to put that in context and understand what's going on. I want to give everyone one last chance because we're about 45 minutes into our broadcast now, and we're going to start to wrap things up. But I want to give everyone one last chance. If you've got a question about flash flooding and Monsoon Awareness Week, be sure to tweet us the question at #Monsoon2016. Well, as we kind of wrap things up here, I'm looking for monsoon stories and flash flooding stories, and we already had a couple. I think Alex, before he had to go, he shared one with us. But Carrie, what's a flash flooding story that you remember in recent memory there in northern or central New Mexico?
Oh gosh, Tim. I'll share a story, but I want to say, if folks that want to get involved, Cocoras. Jorge has been a great partner to promote the Cocoras program. We have over 250, is that right? About 250.
Roughly, yeah, something like that.
In Albuquerque, and we also have a pretty vibrant, social media group on Twitter. But Cocoras is a great way. In fact, Cocoras was developed or came out of a flash flood event in Colorado, as you know, in the late 90s. So really at the core of Cocoras is flash flooding and really trying to capture that variability. I guess what hits me, Tim, is I was working last June when we had the killer flash flood event at Philmont. And that was a case where we had 4 fatalities in New Mexico last year. 2 of them were in vehicles. One was the event at Philmont where the 13-year-old, the Boy Scout, was swept out of a tent during a late night, early morning event. And that's in an area, I think Emily talked earlier about poor radar coverage, and areas of our CWA, to include northeastern New Mexico, very poor coverage. And so we do rely heavily on spotters, we do rely heavily on those ground truth reports, but we haven't really talked too much about late night events that if they hit at 3, 4 in the morning, Jorge's not at Channel 4 typically putting the warnings out at 3 in the morning, so having a weather radio, having some ways to get that information is absolutely critical. We can talk a lot, the science is great and getting the warnings out, but if people are not getting that information and taking action, that's where we need to really build those relationships. So I guess that's the story I might share.
Very true, and you bring up a good thing that information is powerful. With the weather radio, that is one great way to get a message. But now, these days, the flash flood warnings are alerted on all of our smartphones that most of us are carrying these days. And I think sometimes we see that as an irritation, but really, if it goes off, you're probably pretty close to where some flooding is going on. They're getting better and better at narrowing down when they kind of set these phones off. So if your phone goes off and you look down and it says flash flooding, you better be thinking immediately, where's the higher ground? Where can we go to get out of the way? So that's a good point. Hey, Paul, what's a flash flood story that you guys there in the Phoenix area have?
A flash flood story. The one I usually use is I remember one morning we had some heavy rain, and so we had some flash flooding out in the far eastern part of the metro area. A person was, I don't know what their thought process is. I never know what people's thought processes are. There's like, thousands of variables that go into why people do what they do. But a driver came up on a flooded road. A large pickup truck in front of the driver went across the flooded roadway and made it out. And so the person in their passenger car thought they could make it, and so they drove into it. Halfway in, the car started floating down the wash, and this was all being captured by a morning news chopper. And so they started to float down the river and wash. Luckily for them, there was a pedestrian bridge just a bit downstream, and the front of their car actually wedged in front of it. A man ran out onto the bridge to try to help them. It turns out it was a woman and her daughter that were inside the car, and they were able to get out okay. So luckily for them, it turned out fine. The interesting aspect of it is that, this video got a lot of play, and the woman was invited to appear on the Ellen show, I think the next week or so. So she went on the Ellen show, and not only did she get that, but she was also rewarded with a brand new car from the Ellen show. So a bad decision on her part, but I guess the reward for some stupidity.
Now, it remind me, and I think the same thing in Mexico as in Arizona, but if it's posted road closed because of flooding and you drive around that, are there significant issue? I mean, are there laws in place that you can be actually prosecuted if you do that?
Yeah, there's the stupid motorist law. I believe that's a state law. You have to drive around barricades. If it's not barricaded, then there's not necessarily any. You're not breaking the law. But if it's barricades up saying this road's closed and you drive around that, you can be stuck with the bill for the first responders coming to rescue you, which I'm sure could be significant.
Right. I mean, because when you drive around those barricades, not only do you put yourself at risk, for death and property damage, but though you put at risk the first responders who are they're just doing their job, and it's their job to go out and do that, but you're putting them at definite risk that they have to, they would have been high and dry and nice at the fire station or whatever, but now they have to go out and be lowered by a helicopter or wade out into waist-high, fast-moving water to get to you. So, whenever you see those barricades up and the signs that say, turn around, don't drown, do it, because not only are you putting yourself at risk, you're putting everybody else in your vehicle at risk, and you're also putting those first responders at risk. It's just not a good idea.
I try to, again, when people are making these decisions, there's so many variables that go into that decision-making process, and it's easy for us to sit back and kind of scoff and with the stupid motorist law that they have here in Arizona. But I think of another story that happened several years ago. It was a wintertime flooding event, but we had a lot of heavy rain, and there was flooding north of the Phoenix area. There was a family that at their house they had to cross a normally dry wash to get out from their house into civilization. So the storm was bearing down. This was back in 2010. We had a series of really bad storms, and there was flooding taking place. And so the family was at the house, mother, father, and two children, a son and a daughter. During the storm, the son got very ill, and the family made a decision that the kid's health is put him at serious risk here. We need to get out. They determined that risk was higher than the risk of crossing the flooded road that they had to go through. So the father and the family got in the truck, and they attempted to drive across. As they got through, the vehicle got stuck, and so now they were stuck in the car. The mother and daughter the family climbs into the back of the truck. At one point here, the people started coming on the sides of the shore and were able to help the mom and the little girl get off, but the dad and the boy were stuck in the back of the truck, and the water was getting higher and higher. And they couldn't do an air rescue in this situation because the winds were gusting 60, 70 miles an hour. So, it ended up being this father and his son were clinging to the back of the truck, and they were there for an hour and a half before finally the father's energy gave out and they washed downstream. The father ended up washing up on a shore somewhere, but they found the boy's body later on several miles down, and he had died. So, it's a very sad situation. But you think about it, all the variables that go into this decision process that people make. We don't know. We're not in their shoes. We don't know what's taking place when they make those decisions. Hopefully, we're giving them the information they need to make the right decision. But even in those situations, sometimes our ideas of don't drive in there are going to be trumped by something else. Hopefully, a very rare situation like that, people will heed of waiting or finding another way.
Right. I know for El Paso, and I'll get to you here in just a second, Emily, but he brought up a memory that I had back in 2006. We had a real heavy rain in the Black Mountain Range, and it flooded a known low water crossing, a Highway 27 between Hillsborough and Lake Valley. And it's a known, there's low water crossings all along this road, and this one arroyo just flooded. And there was a rancher, a lady rancher, and she was, to get places in rural, I'm sure rural Arizona is the same thing, and but rural New Mexico, you got to drive a long way to get places. And she had gone to like the grocery store in Truth or Consequences, or even Albuquerque, and was coming home, and she had to drive down this road, and she got within a mile of her house, and there was this wall of water going across the road, and she had to choose between trying to drive across that or driving an hour and a half out of her way all the way back around to come at her home another way. And she actually chose to turn around and went and did the safe thing and drove all the way around just to be safe, because she just thought it was wiser to do. It wasn't worth a bag of groceries to drive across that flooded roadway. So, I know that some people get frustrated when people drive around these barriers, but I do think our message of turn around, don't drown is getting out there. Hey, Emily, what's a flash flooding story from the Tucson area?
Yeah, so actually it's the photo behind me, and I've got just this photo and then a little slide on the information. I'll do a little screen share for you guys. So this actually happened last year in September, and the sad story is that this woman had left her home. She had gone to a friend's house who was ill to bring her some groceries, and told her friend, hey, it's raining, I have to get home before the wash floods. So she knew that this wash was between her friend's house and her home, and that it floods, and she tried to do the right thing by leaving early and trying to get home, and unfortunately, this is just one of the times that she didn't make it, and just really sad that this happened. And so the vehicle they found a half mile down the wash away from the roadway, but they actually did not find her body until almost 2 months later. So this happened in the middle of September, so it was more than that, 2.5 months later. So yeah, it happened the middle of September, but they didn't find her until December. So really sad story. Someone actually knowing what the risk was, trying to do the right thing, get home before she couldn't, but unfortunately just made a poor decision, and this unfortunate, very, very, very sad.
It is very sad, but we see it. I know from a forecaster point of view, it gets very frustrating, because it seems like every time you get a big flash flood, somebody does something stupid like this, and or just not. I guess Paul's right. We just don't know what's going through their mind, and there's so many issues that they just make a poor decision. But it is very frustrating when you do all you can, you try to educate everyone, you talk about the impacts, and yet someone makes a poor decision and ends up in just a situation like that. It's just very frustrating and sad. Hey, Jorge, real quick, do you got a story for us? And then we'll wrap up with Carrie kind of going over some safety tips again.
Yeah, my flash flooding story happened in July of 2013, July 26. Carrie, you probably remember this, the famous storm that rolled through the city from the north. 89-mile-an-hour wind gust destroyed numerous trees, but also caused significant flooding, especially in downtown Albuquerque, where numerous cars from Central Avenue, Route 66, towards Broadway, this is in the heart of downtown, were floating. Water just inundated that area, and we had numerous water rescues and just watching it. And that was actually my I'd probably been here for about a month, and I was filling in that night and just going wall to wall and just seeing the images and seeing the videos of cars and then trucks floating like little buoys right there in the middle of the city. I don't recall if anybody was killed. I don't remember hearing that, but that's probably the story I recall. Philmont, I do remember that one very well too. And then last year, we had a storm hit at the end of September that just dumped a lot of rain here in the city, and one person actually did get swept away in the arroyo, and they did pass away. So, but that one in July 2013 is the one that sticks to my mind.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's been an hour. I want to thank everybody who has joined us for this broadcast for the first day of Monsoon Awareness. We'll wrap things up. I want Carrie again to just stress, go over some of the safety tips for people when flash flooding occurs, whether it's in a rural or an urban environment. Carrie, what should people do?
Well, we want them to remember, turn around, don't drown. We've talked about it for the last 30 to 45 minutes. I mean, knowing the forecast, knowing the conditions, knowing the situation you were in, I think it's a good point that you made earlier, Tim, and actually the event that Jorge mentioned, we put out flash flood warnings for that event, and if not for those cell phone alerts, a lot of folks got notified through that wireless emergency alerts. And so when we issue flash flood warnings when there's an imminent threat of flash flooding, not when we think it may happen, but when there's an imminent threat. You take immediate action. You don't, wait and kind of, look around and see, well, maybe or maybe not. You take immediate action. You turn around, you don't drown. And, of course, you heed all the advice of local authorities. You mentioned, blockades. You don't drive around blockades. Those are there for a reason. We have that. That's a huge problem that we have every monsoon season. So, and the other thing I would say is that know to all the folks that are listening to this, we have great partnerships with our media. And so without them, getting that message out would be much, much more difficult. And so it truly is a partnership. We're here in terms of, public safety and trying to save lives. And I think that's the message that I would leave folks with. Turn around, don't drown, and heed warnings.
Very true. And of course, people, like you said before, they can help us with Coco Raz, and you had that the web address, which is www.cocorahs.org. They can report their rainfall data. They can look at all of our web pages, have the radar on them. They can use that. All of our phones, mostly smartphones, you can get a radar app on your phone to just be aware. Take responsibility for yourself. Be aware of the forecast. If you're going hiking, know if it's going to rain, if there's thunderstorms in the forecast, and then be aware if it's raining up above you to get to higher ground. And one of the things I remember in some of the Colorado floods back in the 70s, people made a choice of staying in their cars. They didn't want to get wet. Instead of getting out and getting wet, they got washed away. And Eve Grunfest up in Colorado, she says, "You're better wet than dead." And that's the way it should be. That don't worry about your car, don't worry about your house. Get to higher ground when you start to see that water come up. So, like Carrie said, that's what I'd like to leave everybody with. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Today was day one of a monsoon awareness. Actually, it's day two. We started on Sunday, but this will be the first highlight day. Tomorrow, we'll join us at the same time, and we'll be tweeting and Facebooking the link to YouTube, so you can join us as we'll be talking about lightning, which is my favorite subject, and lightning safety. So be sure to join us tomorrow. Again, I want to thank Harry Jones and Jorge Torres up in Albuquerque. Jorge's there at KOB TV. I want to thank Emily over in Tucson. We also had Alex over in San Diego and Paul in Phoenix. So it's been a great discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and everyone stay safe and have a great night.